Welcome to Zooming in China. I'm Simone Gao. First of all, I will show you a video collection from a channel called the China Tragedy Archive. These videos are uploaded by citizens from Zhengzhou city, where the big flood happened. It shows the situation of Jingguang Tunnel in Zhengzhou city after the flood subsided. You can see that there are many cars floating on the water, piled together. There are many dead bodies in the car.
看看，金刚路下穿隧道，你看成啥了？现在抽水都抽不及，里头车全部都闷进去了。车里头都有司机呀，都有人呐，都是一家一家的呀。你说这咋弄啊？你说说，啊，你看来出来，我想着给家做的急了，我出来看看吧。你看看那外头的景象惨不忍睹啊！我天哪！
Many Zhengzhou citizens came to this place to look for their missing relatives, but the area has been surrounded by armed police, and the people are not allowed to enter. There was a conflict between the people and the armed police.
现在这个陇海路入口到中原路这个隧道这啊，民警已经全拦住了，根本就不让靠近。 几十米开外都不让靠近，现在肯定是吧？有啥事呗，对吧？大家心里知道，肯定是不想让大家看见的事情。祈祷吧，希望不要有太多的伤亡。
这次洪灾远比我们想象的严重。京广北路。
水位慢慢的降，但是慢慢浮出来太多的车了。这水里边看不到的都是车，都是车。
那个车牌号也能看到。
Next is my interview with Chinese water conservancy expert Wang Weiluo. It is precisely about why Zhengzhou spent more than $7 billion to build a water control system, but the result has been so poor.
王先生，非常感谢您接受我的采访。首先，我想问一个具体的。
Mr. Wang, thank you very much for accepting my interview. First of all, I would like to ask a specific question. That is, this time in Henan, the flood submerged the subway in Zhengzhou. The flood came in quite fiercely. I think when people enter the subway, that is a very short time. It may take 10 or 20 minutes to spend in the subway, so they didn't feel the danger upon entering the subway. Then the flood came in immediately. So what do you think of this? What happened? Why did the flood come down suddenly?
它怎么就突如其来的一下来了？这是怎么造成的？
There is a report that one of the retaining walls at the exit collapsed. It was suddenly destroyed by the flood. And then the flood came along the underground pipeline of the subway here. In fact, according to the safety device design and operation requirement, the subway should have its safety device. If water gets into the subway, there will be an automatic response in the subway. It must stop running and must be rescued. And in this subway station, because it is underground, it also has the standard for flood control. In other words, it has the standard of being able to defend against floods that occur once in many years. Then, according to the overall plan of Zhengzhou City, the master plan that must be completed by 2020, it must be able to release the once in 5 years flood on the subway line, underground traffic passages, and the underground squares. This standard is still quite high. The subway line must also have this pumping facility to be able to drain it. So in the end, the subway company must be able to rescue and must take rescue measures. They must not let the subway car soak for a few hours and not try to rescue it. This is just a joke. I can't understand. This is incomprehensible. For example, there's a subway in the US. The middle of it is blocked by water. Then you have to go in and rescue people from both ends right away, right? There is also the easiest thing. All subways in Germany have a percussion hammer next to the window. The percussion hammer means that when the crisis is reached, the window must be broken. and then you can climb out, even if the water outside is already very deep. At this time, the car roof is much safer than inside. It must have a percussion hammer. You can't let them use this firefighting fire extinguisher to hit this toughened glass. The percussion hammer is necessary equipment. These preventative measures are poorly done in China.
Now there's a speculation. Zhengzhou has a Changzhuang reservoir. The Changzhuang reservoir exceeded the warning level in the past 2 days, so they released the flood from the Changzhuang reservoir later. But when the flood was discharged, we don't know if they informed the people living downstream or not. So there's a speculation that the reason Zhengzhou has suddenly flooded so much, including in the subway, is because they discharged the flood from the Changzhuang reservoir.
This is directly related. Why do you say that? Where is Changzhuang Reservoir? Everyone understands that the warning water level is 128 meters. Changzhuang reservoirs had reached 130 meters. In fact, the water level of its flood control check is 134 meters. And he still has the ability to store some more water. But why didn't it do that? Because the reservoir had already experienced piping earlier. What is piping? For a dam, the side that can block the water is called the water retaining surface, and the backside is called the opposite side of water surface. Piping is water that goes through the dam and comes out from the backside of the dam. When the piping occurred, it was still a little bit of water. However, as the water flows and becomes larger and larger, a water pipe will be formed that way, bigger and bigger. If no measures are taken, a big hole will appear and the dam will break. So, for dealing with dam piping, the current rescue technology is pretty good. They put a layer of flood control cloth, created in the Netherlands, immediately on the water diversion surface. This way, the flow will be slowed down so that the hole behind it will not expand. As long as this measure is taken, accidents can be prevented. So, from that point, the Changzhuang Reservoir should have started to discharge water. A very big problem is that the river under the Changzhuang Reservoir is called Jialu River, which is named after a water conservancy official from the Yuan dynasty. He was the water conservancy official who governed the Yellow River. He wrote a book called He Quzi. In it, there's a very important sentence. He wrote, "It is not that the river violates you, it is you who violate the river." He said the root cause of the flood is not the river violates people, but the other way around. We know that the Jialu River is the main river that passes through Zhengzhou city. People in Zhengzhou city call her the Mother River. A reporter said that when the Changzhuang Reservoir began to discharge floods, it was a flood discharge of 3 cubic meters per second. That's a joke. That is not called flood discharge. That is called peeing. 3 cubic meters per second. That is a very small flow. Then he said later that it was 43 cubic meters per second, which was also a joke. And the report also said the water level of the reservoir started to drop. This is also a joke, because this small flow is not enough to make the water level of the reservoir drop. Then there's a report that the flow of this flood discharge has reached 525 cubic meters per second. This figure is more acceptable and more reliable. Maybe the discharge volume was even larger than that. So the report said that the Jialu River measured 600 cubic meters per second at that time. What is the flow that the Jialu River can pass through now? It is 400 cubic meters per second, so a lower limit of the Changzhuang Reservoir's discharge volume exceeds the flow that the Jialu River can accept. Why is the capacity of the Jialu River so small? Because Zhengzhou city dressed up his mother river beautifully when it was building the city. Let her walk in a long way from the southwest of Zhengzhou city, then to the northwest, round the mountain ring, and reaches east, walking from the east to the southeast. The river spanned a full half circle here. The Jialu River spans a half circle around the city center of Zhengzhou. There are also several tributaries of the Jialu River. Then, they let the tributaries go through the city center of Zhengzhou, meeting with the Jialu River. A watered down with dense rivers is formed. So the cities have 3 lakes, wide and narrow rivers, and wetlands as well. So the city said the entire water system is very beautifully arranged. Therefore, the city said that its river is a very beautiful river. But they forgot that the main function of the river is the river. It is to discharge floods. When the flood comes, the river is to discharge floods. It doesn't play around with you. It is not a decoration. Why does Zhengzhou want to arrange its water system like this? Zhengzhou City has built 21 new developments on both sides around the Jialu River and the south to north water diversion project. This is the residential area. This is Zhengzhou City. This is a real estate hotspot. The plan is to sell 300,000 houses here every year for 900,000 people to live in, for a total of 2.7 million people to live in this area in 3 years, all around the beautiful Mother River we just mentioned. By leasing these lands to developers, the Zhengzhou government can make a lot of money, but they forgot the river's limited passing ability. The widest place in the river may be 350 meters. The narrowest place is only 90 meters. It could not pass the 600 cubic meters of flood discharge that came down from above, so it overflowed the streets in Zhengzhou City. So, the floods in streets in Zhengzhou City are not mainly due to the rain coming up, because the surface of the water that came up when it rained was not so turbulent. It shouldn't flow so much, but it rose slowly. Only with flood discharge water from the mountain and from the Changzhuang Reservoir, it can have such a flowing speed. After it overflows its river course, it runs around in the city at the same time. It enters the underground track of the high-speed rail.
I have 2 questions. First of all, you just said that the subway in Zhengzhou, in fact the entire city of Zhengzhou, was submerged by floods, and this is closely related to the flood discharge of Changzhuang. So before the flood discharge of Changzhuang, if the government informs the people immediately,
They did not notify people. They notified late. They said it started at 10 o'clock in the morning on the 20th. They only started to discharge the flood at 10 o'clock in the morning on the 20th. But we saw a lot of things. First, they said that the flood discharge started at 10:30 in the morning on the 20th, but the news was sent out on the 21st. In other words, except that he had already started the flood discharge, he only told you that after the discharge. Before the discharge, they did not make an announcement.
why didn't they make an announcement? Why did they catch everyone off guard?
Because the Changzhuang Reservoir is the second water source of Zhengzhou. It mainly supplies water for Zhengzhou Water Factory. If it releases the water for safety reasons, if the rain stopped, they would suffer economic loss. What would they do? So for the operator, they're always there to guess whether rain is going to come. If you were the boss, what would you think? One side is the income and the wages of employees. The other side is people living downstream that have nothing to do with you or are not directly related to you. Is their house flooded? Is that because of our discharge of flood? They rarely think this way. They must first consider their economic benefits.
也就是说，他如果把水放了以后，
In other words, the water plant will no longer have water. They will not be able to sell the water, and they will have no income. They just kept weighing the trade-offs until the end.
Not exactly. There's one way they can make money. If the reservoir receives an order from the flood control headquarters to let the flood discharge, the money will be paid by the national headquarters for flood prevention and disaster relief. So as long as they don't make a decision to discharge the water by themselves, in that case, they will release the water for nothing. Otherwise, they will get compensated by the government. So when you talk about this mechanism, it releases water for the purpose of flood prevention. It is compensated by the state with relief funds for flood prevention. If you automatically release water, you get nothing. In China, the water plants and reservoirs belong to the state. The workers are only paid a basic salary. Most of the bonus income and benefit income of those workers depend on the water plant, this reservoir, to sell water. This is how it works after economic reform, the introduction of the so-called capitalist management combined with socialism. So you get the shortcomings of socialism and the shortcomings of capitalism to form a very complete and worst system.
In other words, the reservoir does not have any intention to release water by itself.
They do not have intentions.
Right. They waited and waited till the country gave you the final order to release the flood.
They
wait till the last minute, right before the dam is going to collapse. Then the leader tells them to discharge the water.
And it was too late at that time, and the notice was too late.
As I just said, the dam has already experienced piping. The next step in piping is the dam collapsing. If it does not take measures, the dam will break.
So what is happening actually may not only happen in Zhengzhou, but similar incidents may happen all over the country.
This happened to several reservoirs here. In fact, a reservoir in Luoyang is even more critical than this. Part of the dam has already collapsed, so they used engineer soldiers to fix it. They exploded a survey right next to the dam so the water could be discharged from there. This was an uncontrolled discharge. There's also the flood discharge in Inner Mongolia the day before. It is a self-flowing flood discharge, which does not have a flood discharge channel. After the water rises above the dam, it flows over. There are various ways of discharging floods. If a reservoir is designed to meet the standard, its flood discharge is designed according to the principle of the larger flood that it has suffered in history. That is to say, if it really wants to discharge the flood, they will discharge the maximum amount as happened in history. Because when they designed it, only such a discharge capability could ensure that the water level should not rise again. So that what you can imagine is that the reservoir is already filled with water, and you're experiencing the maximum rainfall at the same time. So only if you can discharge the maximum amount of water, you can make sure the water level in the reservoir can drop. So their flood discharge is designed according to the largest historical flood volume. Now China has made a breakthrough. Baihetai Nuomi Du's discharge capability has exceeded the maximum flood volume in their history.
With such a large amount of flood discharge, once they discharge the flood, it will have a very significant impact on the downstream.
It depends on whether the river downstream can withstand such a large amount of flood discharge. It happens that Zhengzhou is the so-called ecological water system city. They totally forgot about this function of rivers. So the maximum passing ability of the Jialu River, which I saw somewhere in the passing, is only 400 cubic meters per second. In this case, you will get more than 500 cubic meters from the top, and add a little from the bottom to more than 600. Since however long the river runs, that's how much water it collects. Plus, the drainage in the city is carried by the river as well, so it collects the water in the city as well. In the end, it exceeded the capacity of the river. At that point, the river returned all the water back to the city, and the city was flooded. That's why the city had such a large current and such a rush.